A pregnant woman stands alone in a courtroom, facing the billionaire husband who destroyed her life. She thinks the worst is over. Then his mistress lunges forward and kicks her straight in the stomach. But here is what nobody knows. The judge watching from the bench is not just any judge. He is the father she never knew existed. And he is about to unleash a storm of justice that will bring down an empire. This story has betrayal, revenge, and a twist ending that will leave you speechless. Stay until the end because the final 5 minutes will change everything you thought you knew. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. The bathroom stall felt like the only safe place left in the world. Claire Harrison sat on the closed toilet lid, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the photos on her phone. Bruises on her upper arms from where he grabbed her 3 nights ago. Screenshots of text messages threatening to destroy her career if she ever tried to leave. A recording app ready to capture whatever happened next. She was 7 months pregnant, and today she was filing for divorce from one of the most powerful men in Seattle. Claire placed her hand on her swollen belly and whispered to her unborn daughter, "We are getting out today. Baby girl, I promise you, no matter what happens in that courtroom, I will protect you." She had spent months preparing for this moment, not crying in corners waiting for someone to notice her pain, not hoping Marcus would magically become the man she thought she married. She had copied financial records from his computer while he slept, carefully transferring files to a hidden cloud account he would never find. She had secretly interviewed 3 of his former employees who witnessed his cruelty, recording their statements on her phone. She had documented everything with the precision of the investigative journalist she used to be before Marcus convinced her to quit her career. Marcus Whitmore thought she was just a pregnant wife too scared to fight back. He thought the isolation, the financial control, and the constant gaslighting had broken her spirit completely. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Claire stood slowly, bracing herself against the stall walls as her baby shifted inside her. She smoothed her simple blue dress over her belly and checked her reflection in the small mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin from weeks of stress and sleepless nights. But something else too, determination that had not been there 6 months ago. She walked out of the bathroom into the crowded hallway of the Seattle family courthouse. Reporters and cameras filled every available space. Marcus's Senate campaign had turned their divorce into front-page news across the entire Pacific Northwest. Everyone wanted to see the billionaire tech mogul and his pretty wife tear each other apart in public. Claire kept her head high as she navigated through the chaos. A reporter shouted her name and asked how she felt about the proceedings. Another asked if the rumors about her mental instability were true. A third demanded to know whether she was seeking alimony or just trying to destroy her husband's political career. She ignored them all. She had learned that responding only gave them ammunition to twist her words. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy with anticipation. Wooden benches filled with spectators who had arrived hours early to secure seats. Claire took her place at the petitioner's table beside her attorney, a woman named Elizabeth Warren who had agreed to take her case despite the powerful enemies it would create. Her folder of evidence sat thick and ready in front of her. Months of work, months of fear, months of planning escape routes and backup plans, all leading to this moment. The doors opened again, and Marcus Whitmore entered like a king returning to his throne. His suit probably cost more than most people earned in a month. His silver hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. His expression carried the calm confidence of a man who had never lost anything he wanted to keep, because he simply bought or destroyed anyone who stood in his way. Beside him walked Vanessa Cole, his communications director. Officially, Claire knew the truth. She had known for 2 years that Vanessa was far more than an employee. The affair had started long before Claire ever met Marcus. She had seen the texts, the late-night calls, the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. Claire was just the latest obstacle in their twisted partnership. A prop for Marcus's family values campaign, a womb to carry his legacy. Marcus paused beside Claire's table as he passed. He leaned down, and she caught the familiar scent of his expensive cologne. His voice dropped to a whisper that only she could hear. "You really think anyone will believe you over me? You really think you can win this?" Claire did not respond. She had learned that silence unnerved him more than words ever could. She simply met his eyes and held his gaze until he looked away first. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Edward Thornton." An older man in black robes entered through the side door. He had silver hair and calm eyes that suggested decades of experience on the bench. Deep lines around his mouth spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights spent weighing justice against mercy. As he took his seat, his gaze swept across the courtroom with practiced authority. Then his eyes landed on Claire, and something strange happened. His composure flickered, just for a moment, his attention fixed on the antique locket around her neck, the one her mother had given her before dying 12 years ago. The locket Claire had worn every single day since, a reminder of the only person who had ever truly loved her. Claire noticed his reaction but could not understand it. She had never met this judge before. She would have remembered those eyes, sharp and searching, that seemed to look through her rather than at her. The hearing began. Claire's attorney presented her case methodically, building the argument with careful precision. Financial abuse documented through bank records and credit card statements. Emotional manipulation evidenced by text messages and recorded conversations. Isolation from friends and family, proven by timeline analysis of Claire's social connections before and after the marriage. Each point supported by documentation Claire had gathered herself, risking everything to collect proof of what she had endured. For a few precious minutes, Claire felt hope building in her chest like a flower opening towards sunlight. The judge looked genuinely disturbed by the evidence. His pen moved rapidly across his notepad as he documented the patterns of control. Marcus's attorney struggled to counter the documented abuse, his rehearsed arguments falling flat against the weight of evidence. Then Vanessa Cole stood up. "She is lying." The words exploded from Vanessa's mouth with shocking fury that shattered the courtroom's professional atmosphere. "She is absolutely lying about everything. This is a performance designed to steal money from a good man." Judge Thornton slammed his gavel against the bench with enough force to make the sound echo off the walls. "Miss Cole, you will sit down immediately. You are not a party to these proceedings, and you have no right to speak." But Vanessa did not sit. Her face had twisted into something ugly, all the sophisticated polish stripped away to reveal raw hatred underneath. Her designer dress and perfect makeup could not disguise the venom in her expression. Marcus reached back and placed a calming hand on her arm. The gesture was possessive, proprietary. It confirmed everything Claire had suspected about their relationship. This was not an employer comforting an emotional employee. This was a man controlling his territory. For a moment, Vanessa seemed to collect herself. She sank back into her seat, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. But her eyes remained fixed on Claire with murderous intensity that made Claire's skin crawl. The judge motioned for Claire to speak. Claire stood slowly, one hand resting protectively on her belly, where her daughter shifted restlessly. She could feel the baby responding to her elevated heart rate, to the stress hormones flooding her system. She described the nights Marcus had cut off her access to money, leaving her unable to buy groceries or gas for her car. She described the weeks he had refused to let her see friends, monitoring her phone and questioning every text message. She described the threats disguised as concern for her mental clarity, the subtle suggestions that she was losing her mind, the way he had convinced her therapist to prescribe medications she did not need. The courtroom grew still as she spoke. Even people who had arrived skeptical, who had read the tabloid stories painting her as a gold digger, found themselves listening. The truth has a weight that lies cannot replicate. Vanessa could not stand it. She could not bear watching Claire command the room's attention, watching sympathy shift toward the woman she had spent years despising. "She is faking everything." Vanessa jumped to her feet again, her voice taking on a shrill edge that made several spectators wince. "She is trying to destroy him because she is jealous and unstable and pathetic and..." Before anyone could react, Vanessa lunged forward. Her movement was so sudden, so violent, that even the security guards stationed near the doors could not respond in time. Her designer heel connected with Claire's stomach in a vicious kick that sent shockwaves through the silent courtroom. Claire collapsed instantly. Her body crumpled to the wooden floor as a scream tore from her throat. Her hands clutched her belly as warm fluid spread beneath her, soaking through her dress. Pain exploded through her abdomen, radiating outward until her entire body felt like it was on fire. But even as she fell, even as agony consumed her thoughts, some part of Claire's journalist instincts remained active. She kept her phone recording in her pocket. She looked directly at the security camera mounted in the corner and mouthed 3 words: "Get this recorded." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air from multiple directions. Security officers rushed forward, finally mobilizing too late to prevent the attack. The judge's gavel crashed repeatedly against the bench as he shouted for order. Judge Thornton's voice cut through the mayhem with unexpected desperation that seemed to surprise even him. Call an ambulance. Now. Someone call an ambulance right now. Claire lay on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against her stomach as she prayed her daughter was still alive inside her. Through the chaos, she saw the judge staring at her with an expression she could not understand. It was not just professional concern. It was something deeper, something personal, something that looked almost like recognition. She did not have time to wonder why before the paramedics rushed in and her world dissolved into pain and fear and the desperate hope that she had not lost everything. The ambulance siren wailed through Seattle traffic as Claire fought to stay conscious. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of pain through her abdomen. The paramedic leaning over her kept telling her to breathe, to stay awake, to hold on. His face was a blur of concern above her, his hands moving efficiently as he checked her vital signs. Claire kept her hands pressed against her belly, whispering to her daughter through cracked lips, "Stay with me. Please stay with me. We are so close to being free. Just hold on a little longer." The ambulance weaved through intersections, other cars pulling aside to let them pass. Through the small windows, Claire caught glimpses of the Seattle skyline, the buildings she had once loved now seeming cold and indifferent to her suffering. At Harborview Medical Center, doctors rushed her into emergency care. The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of examinations, monitors, and medical terminology that Claire could barely process through her terror. Placental abruption, fetal distress, emergency intervention required. Claire gripped the rails of her hospital bed with white-knuckled hands and made the doctor's promise. "Whatever happens to me, you save her. You save my daughter. She is all that matters." By some miracle, they did. The baby's heartbeat stabilized after what felt like hours of uncertainty. The bleeding slowed. Claire was told she would need to remain hospitalized for observation, possibly for weeks. But her daughter was still alive, still fighting. For the first time since the attack, Claire allowed herself to cry from something other than fear. Relief washed through her in waves that left her shaking. A nurse named Anna Campbell brought Claire her phone later that evening. The woman looked shaken, her professional composure cracking slightly around the edges. "I thought you might want to see this. It is everywhere." Claire opened her social media to find her name trending nationally. The courtroom security footage had leaked within hours of the attack, spreading across every platform faster than Marcus's team could contain it. Someone had captured the moment Vanessa kicked her, the violent arc of her leg, the way Claire crumpled to the floor. Justice for Claire. The hashtag had already been used hundreds of thousands of times. Comments poured in from strangers expressing outrage, sympathy, demands for accountability. Claire watched the video once, saw her own body crumple to the floor, saw the blood spreading beneath her dress, and felt sick. But she also felt something else. Vindication. The world was finally seeing what she had endured. The truth was finally breaking through the wall of lies Marcus had built around himself. Her phone buzzed with a call from her former colleague at the newspaper where she used to work. Claire answered with shaking hands. "Claire," the woman said breathlessly, "this is everywhere. Every network is covering it. Marcus's campaign is in full crisis mode. His polling dropped 15 points overnight. They are calling for Vanessa's arrest." "What about the charges against her?" "She was arrested at the scene. Assault charges. She is being held without bail because the judge considered her a flight risk." The woman paused. "You did it. Claire, you actually exposed him." Claire closed her eyes. It was happening. Everything she had worked for, everything she had risked, was finally happening. Then a knock sounded at her hospital room door, and everything changed. A woman in her 50s entered. She had tired eyes with deep shadows beneath them, graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the weathered look of someone who had seen too much ugliness in the world. She moved with the careful deliberation of a person carrying heavy burdens. She introduced herself as Detective Ruth Brennan. "I am not here officially," Ruth said, closing the door behind her and checking the hallway before speaking. "I am here to warn you." Claire's brief moment of hope began crumbling. "Warn me about what?" Ruth pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down heavily. She looked like she had not slept properly in years, like exhaustion had become a permanent part of her features. 4 years ago, Marcus Whitmore's first wife died in a car accident. She was pregnant at the time, 26 weeks all along. Claire felt ice spreading through her veins. The hospital room suddenly felt colder. I did not know he was married before. Not many people do. The records were sealed. The investigation was closed quickly. Too quickly. Ruth reached into her jacket and pulled out a worn photograph that had clearly been handled many times. She slid it across the bed toward Claire. The image showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, standing on courthouse steps with a smile on her face. She wore a blue dress similar to the one Claire had worn today. She looked hopeful. She looked like someone who thought she was about to win. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. Ruth said quietly, "She had evidence against Marcus too. Better evidence than yours. Financial records, witness statements, recordings of his threats. She thought she had won. She thought the system would protect her." Claire stared at the photograph, seeing her own reflection in this dead woman's face. What happened to her 3 days after this photo was taken? Her car went off a cliff on Highway 101. The official ruling was driver error. Wet roads, tragic accident, case closed. But you do not believe that. Ruth's jaw tightened. I was the detective assigned to the case. I found inconsistencies that kept me awake at night. Brake lines that showed signs of tampering. A witness who saw a black SUV following her that night. Tire marks on the road that suggested she was run off deliberately. But before I could pursue any of it, I was reassigned to desk duty. My notes disappeared from the file. The case was closed by someone above my pay grade who never explained why. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched the video of what happened to you today, and I recognize the pattern. Ruth leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Men like Marcus do not stop. They escalate. You winning in the court of public opinion does not make you safe. It makes you a target. You embarrassed him publicly. Men like him cannot tolerate that. Claire looked down at her belly, at the daughter still fighting to survive inside her. Her hand moved protectively over the small life she was carrying. What do I do? You find proof of what happened to Sarah. Real proof. The kind that cannot be buried or bought or dismissed. Ruth stood and moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. I cannot help you officially. I tried that once, and it nearly destroyed my career. They threatened my pension, my family. But I can point you in the right direction. Who else knows the truth? Ruth paused, conflict visible in her expression. There is a man named Drew Sullivan. He was Marcus's head of security for 8 years. He left suddenly about 3 years ago and disappeared completely. Word is he has files. Encrypted. Proof of everything Marcus has done. Where can I find him if I knew that? Ruth said grimly. He would already be dead. Marcus has people looking for him constantly. But keep digging. People like Drew eventually surface when they see someone brave enough to fight. She left without another word. Claire sat alone in the hospital room, the steady beep of the fetal monitor filling the silence. Her brief moment of victory had evaporated completely. She was not winning. She had just painted a larger target on her back. But Claire Harrison had not survived this long by giving up. She reached for her phone and began making calls. Former colleagues, sources from her journalism days, anyone who might help her uncover what really happened to Sarah Whitmore. If Marcus thought she would be intimidated into silence, he had badly underestimated her. She was going to find the truth. And this time, she was going to make sure it could not be buried. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Claire looked up from her hospital bed, exhausted from a sleepless night of research and worry, to see Judge Edward Thornton standing in her doorway. He wore civilian clothes instead of his robes, a simple gray sweater and dark pants that made him look smaller, more human. His expression carried a tension she did not understand. I apologize for the intrusion, he said carefully, his voice quieter than it had been in the courtroom. May I come in? Claire nodded slowly, confused by his presence. Is something wrong with my case? I am not here about the case. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His eyes kept drifting to the locket around her neck, the antique pendant she had worn since the day her mother died. I am here because I need to ask you something that may sound strange. Claire's hand moved instinctively to the familiar weight of the locket against her chest. What is it? Where did you get that locket? The question surprised her. She had expected something about legal procedures, about recusing himself from the case given what happened in his courtroom. Not this. It belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before she died when I was 12. It was the last gift she ever gave me. Why do you ask? Thornton's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly that Claire worried he might collapse. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph with trembling fingers. When he handed it to Claire, her breath caught in her throat. The image showed a young woman with familiar features wearing the exact same locket. She was smiling at the camera with the carefree joy of someone deeply in love. Behind her, slightly out of focus, stood a younger version of the man now beside Claire's hospital bed. I gave this locket to her in 1994, Thornton said quietly. His voice cracked slightly on the date. Her name was Margaret Harrison. We were engaged to be married. I loved her more than I have ever loved anyone before or since. Then one day, without any explanation, she disappeared. I searched for her for years. I hired private investigators. I followed every lead. I never found her. Claire stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The woman in the picture was undeniably her mother, captured decades before Claire was born. The same smile, the same eyes, the same locket. That is impossible, Claire whispered. My mother never mentioned you. She never mentioned any engagement. She never even talked about my father. Thornton sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed, his composure crumbling. I do not know why she left. I spent years trying to understand. I went through every conversation we had, every moment we shared, looking for some sign I had missed. Eventually, I had to accept that she did not want to be found, that for whatever reason she chose to leave me behind. Claire did the math in her head, her journalist's mind automatically assembling the timeline. Her mother had disappeared in 1994. Claire was born in 1995. The timing was unmistakable. You think you are my father, she said flatly. I think it is possible. Thornton's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through his professional composure. When I saw you in that courtroom, something about your face struck me, something familiar that I could not explain. Then I noticed the locket, and I knew I had to find out the truth. Claire's emotions churned between shock, anger, and something that might have been hope. She had spent her entire childhood wondering about her father, creating fantasies about who he might be, why he was not there. Her mother had always refused to discuss it, changing the subject whenever Claire asked. Why should I believe you? How do I know this is not some scheme connected to Marcus? How do I know you are not being paid to manipulate me? Thornton met her eyes directly, and she saw something genuine in his expression. Pain, hope, fear. I will submit to a DNA test. I have no ulterior motive here. I am a federal judge with a reputation I have spent 40 years building. If this becomes public, it could destroy everything I have worked for. Every case I have ever touched could be called into question. Then why risk it? Because I watched a woman get kicked in my courtroom yesterday, and I could not stop thinking that she might be my daughter. His voice grew thick with emotion. Because if that is true, then I have already failed you once by not finding your mother. I will not fail you again. Claire looked down at the photograph still clutched in her hands. Her mother's face smiled up at her, young and full of hope, wearing the same locket that now rested against Claire's chest. The same locket Claire had pressed to her lips countless times after her mother's death, seeking comfort in the only connection she had left. I have a DNA test kit, Thornton said. We can have results within 48 hours. You do not have to decide anything right now. I will respect whatever choice you make. Claire's hand moved to her belly, where her daughter still fought to survive. If you are my father, what then? You cannot be involved in my case. It would be a conflict of interest that could overturn everything. I know. I have already begun the process of recusing myself from the bench for any matters related to you or Marcus Whitmore. But there are other ways I can help. Quietly. Through connections I have built over decades. What kind of connections? Thornton leaned forward, his voice dropping. I know about Drew Sullivan. I know he has evidence that could destroy Marcus. I cannot find him myself without raising suspicion, but I know people who might be able to make contact. Claire felt tears building in her eyes. She had spent so long fighting alone. The possibility of having an ally, a father, felt almost too overwhelming to process. I need time, she said finally. This is a lot to take in. Of course, Sagitum. Thornton stood and placed a small envelope on her bedside table. The DNA test is in there. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. One more thing. Be careful with the people around you. Marcus has resources you cannot imagine. He has already started his counter-campaign. I have seen the early reports. What is he saying? That you are mentally unstable? That you fabricated evidence? That Vanessa was defending herself against your aggression? His voice hardened with disgust. He is going to try to bury you the same way he buried Sarah. Claire's jaw tightened with determination. Then I will have to dig faster than he can bury. Thornton allowed himself a small smile. That is exactly what your mother would have said. After he left, Claire opened the envelope and stared at the DNA test kit inside. Her entire understanding of her life was shifting beneath her feet, but she did not have time to process any of it. She had evidence to gather and a billionaire to destroy. Marcus Whitmore launched his counterattack with devastating precision. Within 72 hours of the courtroom incident, his public relations team had completely reshaped the narrative surrounding his divorce. The edited video came first. In this version, carefully crafted by experts in digital manipulation, the camera angle conveniently shifted just before Vanessa's kick connected. The footage suggested Claire had stumbled forward aggressively, provoking a defensive reaction from a frightened woman. Then came the experts. A psychiatrist appeared on morning television discussing hormone-induced instability in pregnant women. She spoke with rehearsed sympathy about how pregnancy could trigger irrational behavior and false memories. She referenced studies in medical literature with the confidence of someone who had spent days preparing her talking points. What the audience did not know was that this expert had been paid $50,000 by Marcus's team to deliver exactly this message. Finally, Marcus himself took the stage. He held a press conference outside his corporate headquarters, surrounded by supporters and American flags. His voice carried just the right blend of sorrow and strength as he addressed the cameras. "My heart breaks for Claire," he said, his expression perfectly calibrated to convey wounded dignity. "I loved her deeply. I still love her. But her struggles with mental health have made it impossible for me to help her the way she needs. I only hope she gets the treatment she deserves so she can be the mother our child needs her to be." Some journalists pushed back, asking about the video evidence. Marcus's team was ready with answers. The footage was edited. It was taken out of context. It does not show the full picture of what happened. Claire watched the press conference from her hospital bed. Her hands clenched into fists so tight that her nails left marks on her palms. The man who had bruised her arms, controlled her finances, isolated her from everyone she loved, was painting himself as the victim. And people were believing it. The tide of public opinion began shifting with alarming speed. Comment sections that had once demanded justice for Claire now questioned her credibility. Hashtags supporting Marcus started trending. His Senate campaign polling stabilized and began climbing again. The news cycle moved on, hungry for the next scandal. Vanessa was released on bail after the charges were mysteriously reduced to simple assault. She appeared on a sympathetic talk show wearing soft colors and dabbing at manufactured tears with a delicate handkerchief. She described herself as a woman caught in a terrible situation, defending herself against an unstable attacker who had lunged at her without warning. Claire wanted to scream. She wanted to call every news outlet and expose every lie, but she knew that reacting emotionally would only prove their narrative correct. The hysterical pregnant woman, the unstable wife, every outburst would be weaponized against her. Instead, she fought back the only way she knew how. She started investigating. From her hospital bed, Claire began working the phone like she had during her journalism days. She tracked down the sister of Marcus's first wife, a woman named Rachel Montgomery, who lived in Portland and had never believed the official accident story. She found a former groundskeeper from the Whitmore estate who remembered seeing bruises on Sarah's arms in the weeks before her death. She connected with a forensic accountant who had noticed suspicious financial transfers around the time of the accident. Piece by piece, she built a parallel investigation, not to clear her own name, but to prove that Marcus Whitmore was a murderer. The DNA results arrived on her 5th day in the hospital. Claire opened the envelope with shaking hands, her heart pounding against her ribs. The numbers and percentages meant nothing to her until she read the conclusion at the bottom of the report. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Edward Thornton was her father. Claire sat alone in her hospital room, processing a truth that changed everything she thought she knew about her life. Her mother had not been abandoned by some careless man who did not want responsibility. She had run away from a man who loved her, taking their unborn daughter with her. Why remained a mystery Claire might never solve. Her mother had taken that secret to her grave. She called Thornton that evening. The conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and uncertain words. But when she told him the results, she heard something break in his voice. I spent 30 years wondering what happened to her, he said, wondering if I did something wrong, wondering if I could have done something different, wondering if she was even alive. She never told me anything about you, Claire admitted. I thought my father was someone who did not want me. I wanted you. I just never knew you existed. They agreed to meet in person once Claire was stable enough to leave the hospital. But Thornton had more immediate news. I made contact with Drew Sullivan through an intermediary. He is willing to help, but he is terrified. Marcus has people looking for him constantly. He will only communicate through encrypted channels, and he moves locations every few days. What does he have? Everything. Financial records proving payments to the detective who covered up Sarah's death. Communications between Marcus and Vanessa planning what they called the solution to the Sarah problem. And medical records showing Sarah was pregnant with twins when she died. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Twins Marcus killed 3 people that night. Claire, not one. Drew has proof of all of it. The weight of that revelation settled over Claire like a physical burden. She was not just fighting for herself and her daughter anymore. She was fighting for justice that had been denied for 4 years. For Sarah, for the twins who never had a chance to live. What do we do with this evidence? We have to be strategic. If we release it too early, Marcus will claim it is fabricated. His lawyers will tie it up in court for years. We need to present it in a context where it cannot be dismissed. Thornton paused, and Claire heard him take a steadying breath. He is hosting his Senate campaign's largest fundraiser in 2 weeks. The governor will be there, the attorney general, half of Washington's power structure. You want to expose him at his own party. I want to destroy him in front of everyone who has ever enabled him. Can you be ready? Claire looked down at her belly, at the daughter still fighting to survive inside her. I will be ready, whatever it takes. She hung up the phone and began planning the takedown that would either set her free or get her killed. The catastrophes came in rapid succession, each one more devastating than the last. Just when Claire thought she had found solid ground, the earth crumbled beneath her feet again. The first blow landed 3 days after Claire learned the truth about her parentage. Marcus filed an emergency custody petition with the family court. His lawyers argued that Claire's documented mental instability made her a danger to her unborn child. They presented testimony from psychiatrists claiming she suffered from severe pregnancy-induced psychosis. They submitted fabricated medical records suggesting a history of violent outbursts and delusional thinking. Claire's attorney called with the devastating news. Her voice was tight with frustration and fear. There is legal precedent for removing custody before birth in extreme cases. It has only happened a handful of times. But the cases exist. If the judge rules in his favor, they could take your daughter the moment she is born. You would not even get to hold her. Claire felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She had fought so hard to protect her baby, endured so much to keep her safe, and now Marcus might simply have her taken away through legal manipulation. The second catastrophe followed within hours. Claire was discharged from the hospital with nowhere to go. Marcus had frozen all their joint accounts with a single phone call to their bank. Her credit cards had been canceled. The apartment was in his name, and his lawyers had already filed to have her removed as an unauthorized occupant. She called everyone she could think of. Former colleagues were afraid of Marcus's legal team and the threatening letters they had received warning against helping her. The few friends she had left had been contacted by private investigators asking questions about Claire's mental state. Every door closed in her face. Every potential ally retreated behind walls of fear. That night, Claire found herself at a women's shelter on the outskirts of Seattle. She slept on a narrow cot in a room shared with 3 other women, listening to their stories of abuse and survival. It was humiliating. The investigative journalist who once exposed corporate criminals was now homeless and pregnant, dependent on charity. It was also strangely clarifying. These women had nothing, no money, no connections, no powerful allies, and they were still fighting. They were still surviving. They were still finding ways to protect themselves and their children. Claire had more resources than most of them would ever see. She had evidence. She had allies. She had skills. She had no right to give up. The third catastrophe nearly broke her completely. The DNA results confirming Thornton as her father were leaked to the press. Claire never learned who was responsible. But the timing made Marcus the obvious suspect. His team had somehow obtained the private medical records and released them at the exact moment to cause maximum damage. Headlines exploded across every news outlet. Judge in Whitmore case revealed as alleged victim's father. Scandal rocks Seattle courthouse. Conflict of interest destroys credibility. Was the whole thing a setup from the beginning? Within hours, Thornton was suspended pending investigation. Every case he had touched in the past decade was placed under review. His 40-year reputation, built on integrity and fairness, crumbled overnight under accusations of corruption and conspiracy. Claire sat in the shelter's common room, watching the news destroy the man who had just entered her life. She had brought this on him simply by existing. Marcus had not just attacked her. He had weaponized her very identity against the only powerful ally she had left. Thornton called her that evening. His voice sounded older, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He sounded like a man who had lost everything he spent his life building. "I am so sorry," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "This is my fault. If I had never agreed to the DNA test, if I had never let you help me, do not apologize." His voice was firm despite his exhaustion. "I made my choice knowing the risks. I would make the same choice again. You are my daughter. Nothing else matters. Your career is destroyed. Careers can be rebuilt. Daughters cannot be replaced." He paused, and Claire heard him take a steadying breath. "This changes nothing about our plan. If anything, it makes exposing Marcus more important. We have to show the world what kind of man he really is." How Claire asked desperately. "Drew's evidence is useless if everyone thinks we are running a conspiracy. They will say the files are fabricated. They will say we manufactured everything. Then we need something undeniable. Something that happens in front of witnesses who cannot be bought." Thornton's voice hardened with determination. "The fundraiser is still happening. The governor and attorney general are still attending. We just need to be smarter about how we approach it." Claire wiped her eyes and forced herself to focus. She had survived the courtroom attack. She had survived being kicked while pregnant. She had survived losing her home, her money, and her reputation. She would survive this too. "Okay," she said quietly. "Tell me what we need to do." That night, Claire lay on her shelter cot and felt her daughter kick inside her. The movement was strong, defiant, alive. Her baby was still fighting. Claire placed her hand on her belly and made a silent promise. "We are going to make it through this. Both of us. And when we do, the man who tried to destroy us will spend the rest of his life in prison." The shelter became Claire's unexpected sanctuary. The women there had nothing but each other, and they shared everything freely. Survival strategies passed down from mothers who had escaped before. Legal resources gathered through years of navigating a system designed to fail them. Underground networks that helped abuse victims disappear when official channels provided no protection. One woman in particular changed everything for Claire. Her name was Donna Marshall, a former paralegal who had fled her own abusive husband 5 years earlier. She had lost her career, her home, her savings. She had rebuilt everything from nothing, and now she helped other women do the same. Men like Marcus always have a weakness. Donna told her over weak coffee in the shelter's cramped kitchen, "It is never the crime itself. They are too smart for that, too careful. It is always the cover-up, the payments to silence witnesses, the bribes to make problems disappear, the lies they tell to maintain their image. Follow the money, and you will find the truth." Donna helped Claire organize the evidence she had gathered. Financial records spread across the shelter's dining table. Witness statements recorded on phones and transcribed by hand. The encrypted files Drew Sullivan had finally begun sending through a series of secure dead drops arranged by Thornton's contacts. Piece by piece, they assembled a case that could bring down an empire. Then Claire went into labor 3 weeks early. The contractions started at midnight, sharp pains that tore through her abdomen without warning. Donna drove her across town to a hospital where Marcus's people would not think to look. They used a fake name to avoid his surveillance network, registering Claire as Margaret Sullivan in honor of her mother and Drew. The birth was difficult. Complications arose that sent the medical team into urgent action. For several terrifying minutes, They lost the baby's heartbeat entirely. Monitors screamed alarms. Doctors shouted orders. Claire screamed prayers she had not spoken since childhood. Please, God, please let her live. Take anything else. Take everything else. Just let on her live. Then she heard it. A cry, small but fierce. Alive. The doctor placed a tiny, perfect baby girl in Claire's arms. She weighed barely 5 pounds, but her eyes were open and searching, already curious about the world she had entered. Claire held her daughter for the first time and felt something shift permanently in her chest. Every fear, every doubt, every moment of despair from the past months fell away like dead leaves. Nothing mattered except the warm weight of this child against her heart. Her name is Hope, Claire whispered through tears, because that is what you are, and that is what he can never take from me. Donna stood beside the bed, tears streaming down her weathered face. She is beautiful. She is everything. Claire spent 3 days recovering while Donna coordinated with Thornton and the others. The fundraiser was approaching rapidly. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had a plan that might actually work. But they also had a problem. Drew Sullivan had gone silent. His last message warned that Marcus's security team had nearly located him. He had to move again, deeper into hiding, further off the grid. The encrypted files were complete, but Drew himself might not be able to testify in person. We do not need him physically present, Thornton said during a phone call from an untraceable number. The files speak for themselves, but we need a way to present them that Marcus cannot dismiss as fabrication. Claire thought about it while nursing Hope in the quiet hospital room. Marcus controlled the narrative because he controlled the context. Every piece of evidence she released, he spun as fake news or conspiracy. She needed to change the context itself. Then the solution came to her. Vanessa Cole? Thornton was skeptical when Claire explained her idea. She kicked you in open court. She has spent weeks destroying your reputation on television. Why would she help us? Because she is not stupid. Claire replied, she has been with Marcus for 6 years. She knows what happened to Sarah. She knows she is expendable. Right now she thinks she is winning, but eventually Marcus will discard her the same way he discards everyone. You want to turn her? I want to give her a choice. Help us bring him down, or go down with him. Let her decide which future she prefers. It was a massive gamble. Vanessa might refuse. Worse, she might alert Marcus to the plan. But Claire had learned something important during her weeks at the shelter. Sometimes the only way to defeat a monster was to offer mercy to his accomplices. Thornton made the approach through intermediaries. The message was simple. We have evidence that implicates you in Sarah Whitmore's death. You can testify against Marcus and receive reduced charges, or you can take the fall with him. Your choice. For 3 agonizing days, there was no response. Claire began to think the gamble had failed. Then Vanessa called. Her voice was different from the confident, vicious woman Claire remembered from the courtroom. She sounded tired, scared, human. I have recordings, Vanessa said quietly. Insurance I never thought I would need. Marcus talking about Sarah. Marcus planning what to do about you. Everything. Why are you helping us? Because I finally realized what I should have seen years ago. Vanessa's voice cracked. I was never going to be the one he chose. I was just useful until I was not. And when he is done with me, I will end up like Sarah. Claire felt no sympathy for the woman who had kicked her pregnant belly, but she understood the calculation. We have a plan, Claire said. The fundraiser. Can you get us inside? I can do better than that. Vanessa's voice steadied with new determination. I can get you on stage. The governor's ball at the Grand Pacific Hotel was Seattle's most exclusive event of the year. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Champagne towers rose beside ice sculptures carved into elegant swans. The city's most powerful people gathered to celebrate Marcus Whitmore's inevitable Senate victory. Claire entered through the service entrance, dressed in the black uniform of catering staff. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. She had faced worse than a ballroom full of wealthy strangers. Hope was safe with Donna at a secure location arranged by Drew Sullivan's contacts. The ballroom was overwhelming. Hundreds of guests mingled beneath golden lights, their laughter and conversation creating a wall of sound. Claire spotted Marcus immediately. He stood at the center of everything, working the room with practiced charm. Vanessa hovered nearby in a stunning silver gown, playing her role as the loyal communications director. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd. Vanessa gave an almost imperceptible nod. Claire positioned herself near the main stage where Marcus would deliver his victory speech later in the evening. She carried a flash drive containing Drew's evidence in her pocket. The venue's audiovisual system had been compromised by allies Thornton had arranged. Everything was in place. Then Marcus saw her. He crossed the ballroom with unhurried confidence, pausing to accept congratulations from donors along the way. By the time he reached Claire, his expression had settled into amused contempt. "You really are your mother's daughter," he said quietly, accepting 2 champagne glasses from a passing server. She never knew when to quit either. Claire felt ice spread through her veins. "You knew my mother, Margaret Harrison. Pretty thing, very idealistic. Believed in truth and justice and in all those quaint concepts." Marcus sipped his champagne with casual cruelty. "Who do you think introduced me to the world of getting away with things? Your judge father was not the only one who knew her." The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. Marcus had known about her parentage longer than she had. Her entire marriage, everything that led her here, had been planned. "You chose me on purpose," she whispered. "I choose everything on purpose." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you have evidence. I have seen what Drew sent you. It does not matter. Evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. This is my world." "Claire, you are just visiting." Security guards materialized behind Claire. Marcus raised his voice so nearby guests could hear. "We have an intruder, a mentally disturbed woman who has been stalking me. Please escort her out." Hands grabbed Claire's arms. She struggled but could not break free. Cameras flashed as guests turned to watch the commotion. Marcus watched with cold satisfaction as she was dragged toward the exit. Claire looked desperately toward the stage where Vanessa stood. Their eyes met. For one terrible moment, Claire thought Vanessa had betrayed her after all. Then Vanessa stepped forward. "Stop." The single word cut through the noise. Guards hesitated. Guests turned. Marcus's expression flickered with confusion. Vanessa walked toward them, her silver gown catching the light like armor. She moved with deliberate purpose until she stood directly between Marcus and Claire. "She is not lying," Vanessa said. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Everything she has accused him of is true." Marcus laughed nervously. "Vanessa, you are obviously confused." "I am not confused. I am tired." Vanessa turned to face the crowd. "I have been his accomplice for 6 years. I helped him cover up his first wife's death. I kicked Claire in that courtroom because he told me to, because he promised I would be the one he chose." Her voice grew stronger with each sentence. "But I have seen what he does to the women he promises things to. I have recordings, insurance I hoped I would never need." She pulled out her phone and connected it to the venue's speaker system, using access codes Marcus never knew she had copied. His voice filled the ballroom, discussing how to handle Claire, referencing what worked with Sarah, laughing about that stupid judge who does not even know he has a daughter. The room erupted into chaos. Marcus lunged toward Vanessa, but security guards intercepted him. Claire saw the exact moment his confidence shattered, replaced by animal panic. The Attorney General stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I think we need to have a conversation." Marcus tried to run. He did not get far. Federal agents materialized from positions throughout the crowd. They had been there all evening, waiting for the signal that Thornton had arranged. Marcus was handcuffed in front of everyone who had ever enabled his crimes. Vanessa was arrested too. She went quietly, knowing what she had done and accepting the consequences. Claire stood in the center of the ballroom, breathing hard, watching the man who had tried to destroy her life led away in handcuffs. It was over. Then Thornton appeared at her side. He was not supposed to be there. His career was in ruins. But he had come anyway. "I could not miss this," he said quietly. Claire leaned into him, allowing herself one moment of weakness. "Thank you for everything. You did this yourself." Thornton's voice was thick with pride. "I just helped point the way." The federal trial of Marcus Whitmore became the most watched legal proceeding in a decade. Every network carried live coverage. Every newspaper devoted front-page headlines to the daily revelations. The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and representatives from women's rights organizations who had traveled from across the country to witness justice. The prosecution built its case methodically, exactly as Claire had once built her journalism investigations. Former federal prosecutor Richard Sullivan led the team with precision and passion. Financial records proved payments to the detective who ruled Sarah's death accidental. Communications showed Marcus and Vanessa planning what they called the solution to the Sarah problem. Medical records confirmed Sarah had been pregnant with twins. 3 victims. Not one, honest. Drew Sullivan testified via secure video link from an undisclosed location. His files proved devastating. Every encrypted document, every secret recording, every buried transaction painted a picture of calculated murder dressed up as tragic accident. Vanessa Cole took the stand as a cooperating witness. She described 6 years of manipulation and control. She explained how Marcus had made her believe she was special, different, the exception to his pattern of disposable women. She detailed the night of Sarah's death, when she had driven a second car to make the accident look convincing. Her testimony left the courtroom silent. Claire testified on the final day of prosecution evidence. She walked to the witness stand with steady steps, though every moment reminded her of the courtroom where this nightmare began. She described how Marcus isolated her from friends and family, how he controlled her finances until she could not buy groceries without his approval, how he threatened to destroy her career if she ever tried to leave, how Vanessa kicked her pregnant belly while security guards watched helplessly. He did not try to kill me outright, Claire concluded. He wanted to break me first, make me believe I was worthless, make me believe no one would ever believe me over him. Her voice strengthened. He was wrong. The defense offered little resistance. Marcus's attorneys had abandoned their aggressive strategy once the evidence became undeniable. They focused instead on negotiating the best possible outcome for a client who had clearly lost. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder, conspiracy, witness tampering, financial crimes, abuse of power. Marcus Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Vanessa Cole received 12 years. She accepted the sentence without appeal. Outside the courthouse, Claire spoke briefly to reporters. She did not celebrate or gloat. She simply asked people to remember Sarah Whitmore and her unborn twins. 3 lives that had been erased and covered up. 3 people who deserved justice. Detective Ruth Brennan watched the verdict from her hospital room, recovering from injuries sustained in the suspicious car accident months earlier. She had regained consciousness just in time to provide testimony about the original cover-up. Some things are worth waiting for. She told the nurse who brought her the news. Judge Edward Thornton was eventually reinstated after an investigation cleared him of any wrongdoing. The review found that his relationship with Claire had been unknown to both of them until after the initial courtroom incident. He retired 2 years later, choosing to spend his remaining years as a grandfather rather than a judge. The system had failed Sarah Whitmore. It had nearly failed Claire too. But in the end, persistence and courage had forced accountability. It was not a perfect victory. It never is. But it was enough. 1 year after the verdict, Claire walked along a Seattle beach with hope balanced on her hip. The toddler's eyes were wide with wonder at the waves crashing against the sand. She reached toward the water with tiny fingers, babbling sounds that might have been words. "This is the ocean," Claire told her daughter. "Someday I will teach you how to swim in it." Hope laughed and grabbed a fistful of Claire's hair, completely uninterested in swimming lessons. Claire smiled and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. The past year had been difficult in ways she never expected. Healing was not a straight line. Some nights she still woke screaming from nightmares about the courtroom, about Vanessa's heel connecting with her stomach, about all the ways her story could have ended differently. She saw a therapist twice a week. She attended support groups for abuse survivors. She learned that trauma did not simply disappear because justice had been served. It required constant, patient work. But she was rebuilding. Claire had returned to journalism, specializing in investigating domestic abuse among wealthy families. The patterns she uncovered were depressingly familiar. Men who use money and power to silence their victims. Systems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. She also founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women escape abusive partners. The waiting list for their services grew longer every month, a tragic reminder of how common her story was. Thornton caught up with them on the beach, carrying a picnic basket and smiling at his granddaughter. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. He was not trying to replace the father Claire had imagined during her childhood. He was simply trying to be present now. "She looks more like Margaret every day," he said, watching Hope grab at seashells. Claire felt the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of her mother. The mystery of why Margaret had disappeared remained unsolved. They had found her grave, but not her reasons. Some questions would never be answered. "I wish she could see her," Claire said quietly. Thornton nodded. "Me too. Every day." They spread a blanket on the sand and ate lunch while Hope crawled between them, investigating every object within reach. The Seattle skyline rose in the distance, glass towers catching the afternoon light. One of those towers had recently removed the Whitmore name from its facade. Marcus's company had been dissolved in bankruptcy proceedings. His legacy was being systematically erased. Good, Claire thought. Let him be forgotten. How is the new book coming? Thornton asked. Claire had been writing her story, not as journalism, but as memoir. The publisher expected it would become a bestseller. Claire did not care about sales. She cared about reaching other women who might be trapped in similar situations. Slowly, she admitted, "Some parts are harder to write than I expected." Thornton reached over and squeezed her hand. "Take your time. The truth will still be there when you are ready." Hope chose that moment to dump an entire handful of sand onto her grandfather's lap. Thornton laughed with genuine delight, brushing off his clothes while the toddler giggled at the mess she had created. Claire watched them together and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Peace. Not perfect peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Love that had survived the worst circumstances. Family that had formed from broken pieces. Hope that had been born from despair. It was enough. It was more than enough. 3 years after Marcus Whitmore's conviction, Claire received news that he had died in prison. Heart attack. Natural causes. No one claimed the body. She felt nothing when she heard. No satisfaction, no grief, just emptiness where hatred used to live. He had consumed so much of her energy for so long. Now he was simply gone. Vanessa Cole was released after serving 8 years. She moved to Portland and began working at a women's shelter, helping other survivors rebuild their lives. Claire did not forgive her. Forgiveness was not required for moving forward, but she acknowledged that Vanessa's testimony had been essential to the conviction. That counted for something. Detective Ruth Brennan retired from the police force and spent her remaining years consulting on cold cases involving wealthy suspects. She died peacefully in her sleep at 63, still fighting for justice until the end. Drew Sullivan remained in hiding. He sent Claire an encrypted message every Christmas, brief updates confirming he was still alive. She never learned his real location. She never asked. Claire remarried 2 years after the trial. Her husband was a quiet man who worked as a high school teacher. He was not wealthy. He was not powerful. He was simply kind. He earned her trust through patience and consistency. Never pushing, never demanding. He loved Hope as his own daughter. His name was not important. What mattered was that Claire had chosen him. She had opened her heart again despite everything that had happened. She had refused to let Marcus's cruelty define the rest of her life. Hope Harrison Thornton turned 6 on a sunny September afternoon. Her birthday party featured a cake shaped like a magnifying glass because she had recently decided she wanted to be a detective when she grew up. To catch the bad guys. She explained to anyone who asked. Like Mom did. Claire watched her daughter blow out candles surrounded by friends and family. Thornton sat nearby, older and grayer, but still sharp. Claire's husband stood at her side, his hand warm in hers. Donna Marshall had come up from the shelter, now serving as its director. The people in this room had saved her life, not by rescuing her, but by supporting her while she rescued herself. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Hope was asleep, Claire sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had one final chapter to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster as the thoughts clarified. "If you are reading this," she typed, "you might be trapped in a situation that feels impossible to escape. You might believe that no one will ever believe you over the person hurting you. You might think you are too broken, too scared, too alone to fight back. I want you to know something important. You are stronger than you believe. You are braver than you feel. And you do not have to do this alone. There are people who will fight beside you, resources that can help, systems that, despite their flaws, can sometimes deliver justice. The path forward will be harder than anything you have ever done. There will be days when you want to give up, moments when the obstacles seem insurmountable. Keep going anyway, not because victory is guaranteed, not because the world is fair, but because you deserve to be free, Because your life has value that your abuser can never diminish. Because somewhere out there, a future is waiting for you that is worth fighting for. I almost died. My daughter almost never existed. The man who tried to destroy me had money, power, connections, and a system designed to protect him. I won anyway. You can too. Claire saved the document and closed her laptop. Through the window, she could see the Seattle skyline glittering against the night sky. Somewhere in that maze of lights, other women were trapped in situations just like hers had been. Other children were growing up in homes filled with fear. She could not save them all, but she could keep trying, keep writing, keep fighting, keep proving that monsters could be defeated when ordinary people refused to look away. Hope murmured in her sleep down the hall. Claire stood and walked to her daughter's room, pausing in the doorway to watch the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. 6 years ago, this child had been a heartbeat on a hospital monitor, a fragile hope in the middle of a nightmare. Now she was a fierce, joyful girl who wanted to catch bad guys and eat birthday cake and explore every corner of the world. Claire had given her that future. Not alone, not without help, but through her own choices, her own courage, her own refusal to surrender. That was the real message of her story. Not that justice was automatic or easy, not that the system always worked, but that individual determination could change everything. One voice raised against silence. One woman who decided she deserved better. She had been kicked in a courtroom while 7 months pregnant. She had lost her home, her money, her reputation. She had been called crazy, manipulative, unstable. She had won anyway, and so could anyone brave enough to try.